Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So, we're still cooking, and actually, it's not like it's weird. It's not so much cooking as like I specialize in a lot of off meta stuff, and we're just either rejigging some trees that we were on the channel a little while ago, or I played a lot of builds. Moral of the story. So, what are we talking about in this video? We are talking about a corrupting cry. Basically corpse explosion, ancestral commander. Now, why is this now possible? Mainly because of the new ascendancy points that are available to us. So this is the ancestral commander, okay? Now we've already done a bone zone build, which I'll be playing in the I guess from the start. But basically, there's a node that's been added to the tree for this called Death Rattle. Now, what Death Rattle does is nearby, well, Call of the Ancestors and Death Rattle, right? So what Death Rattle does is nearby corpses explode when you Warcry, dealing 12% of their life as physical damage. Warcry is also open chests, so it's pretty lazy mode. Also, we have Call of the Ancestors, which is, they have reduced Warcry speed and 120% increased Warcry cooldown recovery rate, right? Well, we don't really need to worry about that reduced Warcry speed because we can run things like Red Blade Banner and things like that. But that 120% increased Warcry cooldown recovery rate is totally bonkers. So there's a few things we can do with this. Added to the fact that if we're also looking for tanking up, we've got Ancestral Defiance and Ancestral Endurance. And notoriously, the way that you run this particular build is you run it with Enduring Cry. So you use an Enduring Cry setup. Now, the biggest issue that I currently have with this build is that while it looks like it's a cool concept, it's not actually very viable unless you've got currency in the bank. And the reason why I say that is because it requires a specific item called the Forbidden Shaco. Now, in particular, this Forbidden Shaco that has level 34 Corrupting Cry is incredibly expensive. And at least from my memory, the league that I played this in, this was worth a mint. Now, if you don't think that people aren't going to play this build off of PoE 2 having a Warcry Singer build, and then they'll see that and be able to do that in Path of Exile 1, which is exactly what this build is, then yeah, you got another thing coming. This is not going to be a cheap helm, and even 34 Corrupting Cry, I'm pretty sure it goes higher than that, and I couldn't afford it because then we start talking about hundreds of divs just for the helm. I think this helm, when I bought it in 3.24, was like 60 div or something ridiculous like that. So it's not a cheap build to get it up and running, so I'll precursor that before we get into the video. This is an endgame build, not a league start build. You're going to play like something like Earth Shatter or something like that, or any other build that you can play like Bone Shatter or whatever, and then you convert to this at the very end. But fundamentally, how it needs to work now is previously, and I'll put my guide from 3.24 up with it. Previously, we used to be able to run auto Warcries, and it was basically like, there was no reservation cost for auto exertion. And so basically you could just sort of walk around and it was an auto bomber build. Unfortunately now you won't be able to do that, and you're going to be stuck to having to click the Warcry button, which is fine because we're abusing other things, in particular the Death Rattle node on the Ascendancy, which basically explodes corpses, right? And as they shotgun, they're going to blow stuff up quicker. And corpses scale with the minions or the enemies within the map that you're playing. So, you're going to get big hits either way you shake it. And we sort of go one step further with that, and we added in Corpse Walker to the build. Now, this isn't necessarily the most ideal set of boots, but we get a couple of really good attributes from it. So, number one, we get increased life regeneration per second. Number two, we get 1% increased movement with each corpse that's near us. So we get a pretty good amount of movement speed off it. Probably a lot of movement speed. But the other big advantage that comes from these boots is actually you trigger level 20 Corpse Walk when equipped. So you always have corpses with you as long as you're moving. And funnily enough, these boots are actually pretty cheap and you can use them pretty early on. So big advantage is you always have corpses, which means as long as you're moving, your Corrupting Cry does two things. It applies corrupted blood to the enemy and rips their health up with physical damage over time. And the other thing is it blows corpses up. So theoretically, you should be able to nuke things if you can survive it. Currently, this tree is set at 176,000 effective hit pool. We've got something like 746 life regeneration per second. Pardon me. We don't have a huge life pool, and that's one of the problems with the build, but even that being said, it's pretty tanky with 53,000 armor, and we've got a good amount of block and stuff like that as well in the build. Now, I haven't put things like versatile combatant into it. It doesn't really do anything to it. There are other things you could do, like respecking out of armor and or these nodes here, for example. I think I just added them in for the the shits and giggles, but we could actually make it tankier by bringing it up to, well, that makes it insanely tanky. It's probably a tree that will run by putting things like block into the build, for example. So if you take it to 100, you get 248,000 effective hit pool, and you start to build the spell block up, right? We can do that. It's 300, but we're over the cap there. So we sort of got to lose something. We lose 24,000 with that, and then we chuck that on, we get 272. So we're probably better off with less armor, but more block, right? We're just basically abusing the Surveillant. But yeah, Surveillant is just really strong. It's just like the best defensive item that's ever been added to the game across the board. Anyway, you get the gist. Basically, this is one of the best ways to sort of set this build up defensively. So we have 40,000 armor. We have 82 and 62% block chance. So it's pretty strong. Overcapped reses, chaos reses up. Like, if you add things like Progenesis, and I deliberately took Progenesis off this build, but I was running a Progenesis in mine, you go up to 308k. Like, you start to do some insane numbers as you scale this up, so it's quite tanky off the onset. I did delve at about 700 to 800 depth with this build when I played it, and it was much less than what this is. And also no errors or anything in the POB. We'll talk about all that stuff shortly. Now, another couple of other things. We actually run Defiance of Destiny in this setup as well. Because of the amount of life that Corrupting Cry will take off of you, you can then predict that coming, and then you can remove, or enemy damage inbound or whatnot. You can basically predict that inbound damage and then get that back in life. And that sort of synergizes with the gain 15% missing unreserved life before being hit by the enemy as well. And so basically you're getting 31% plus 15%, so 46% of any damage coming in is going to be recovered before you actually take it, which is really useful. We also run around with somewhere in the vicinity of 8 endurance charges, so we get a lot of benefits from endurance charges on the build too. We taunt the enemy as well. We have corpses near us. We've got basically everything we need. Warcry is used, we say we have it 1, doesn't really affect the build. But yeah, that's basically the gist of it. And basically you're just gonna run around, you're gonna Warcry as you run around, and then, blow up screens and whatnot. If there was a way to somehow proc even some sort of bleed or something from the corpse explosion, that'd be really cool, but I don't think there probably is. But anyway, there's a lot of things that we can do with it. Predominantly so, though, we're just going to run around, hit our Warcry, blow everything up, and have a fun day. We also do run Reap in the skill setup as well, 6-link Reap setup. And the reason for that is this just gives us a little bit of extra single target damage for when we need to get our bleed stacks up, or our corrupted blood stacks up when we're versing a boss or something of that nature. But yeah, that's basically it. We do also run the Flow Untethered cloth belt, and I'll explain that. A lot of this build is really heavily predicated around cooldown reduction. So arguably you could actually probably get rid of this now. You probably don't need the Flow Untethered. If you threw a Mage Blood on this and you ran it, you're basically nigh unkillable at that point. So, that's another thing to consider. But anyway, there's a lot that you can do with this build. But pretty much its main item is you need the Forbidden Shaco for it to work. And for that, I guess, component alone, it's a bit of a bait build because it's quite unattainable anytime soon in the sort of initial setup. The other thing too is we have Dawn in here too. Anyway, let's get into the config sheet, and I'll talk you through the build and how it works. And yeah, we'll go from there. Okay, so first of all, we're going to be running through a lot of packs. So Solar Nara, Solar Tukahama, those are pretty much the first two go-tos. No other configuration changes here. Enduring charges come from our endurance charges, come from our Enduring Cry. We have Life Tap. Onslaught we basically get, I believe, from one of our points here. I think we have, Lead by Example, which gives us Onslaught for when we're running around. So that's where that's coming from. We've got a Flask active. Corpses, we just assume 10 corpses nearby. And we have 10 nearby enemies, give or take, unless you're fighting a boss. Have you been hit recently? More than often, you're going to be hit when you plan a build like this. Have you used the Warcry? Yes. Have you used the Warcry in the past 8 seconds? Yes. Seconds affected by a Warcry buff, about 2 is about right. Warcry's recently used, about 1. Corrupting blood, so we account for a cap of 10 stacks, like if it was 5 stacks, it's a mil. But the damage is misleading because corrupting blood totally rips through enemies, so it's much higher than this, but it's just hard to calculate what it actually is. We have Harbinger of Time up as well, so we usually have Slipstream, so the build's actually quite fast when running through enemies and stuff like that too. Pride Aura, again, like in the past, you can either set it to initial or maximum, just depends on what you want to tell yourself at the end of the day. And Intimidate doesn't do anything to the build, so we do have Taunt as well, because we're running Warcries and whatnot, so we do have that, but yeah, it's mediocre damage increases based on what this is telling me. And Guardian Pinnacle boss damage, so pretty straightforward stuff. It's actually not a complicated build to set up or understand. And the reason why I always talk through these windows is so if you're less experienced with POB, then you can actually pull apart how your POB works and other POBs to test whether or not somebody's doing some funky stuff by revving shock, like, you know, if you rev this up to 50%, your damage is going to go up, stuff like that. It's all really facetious stuff people tend to do in POBs to try and over-assume things, but usually it's much simpler than it really looks. But anyway, let's get into the gear. Okay, so I tried to recraft some of the items. This is my original build that I played from 3.24, which was the last league. But basically, yeah, you're looking for either a wand or something of that nature. In this case, a Hunter Eagle Claw is pretty good. That gives you damage over time. Also found increased damage per endurance charge is pretty useful to have on the build as well. So that's basically what you want out of your amulet, out of your weapon. It's actually quite hard to find modifiers that synergize with this setup because it's a bit of a weird setup. You could arguably run a bow setup with this as well, and that's something else to consider. And you could run Maloney's mechanism or something of that nature. So the other thing you could also run is, was it Ensnare, which does increase damage to enemies, and arguably Ensnare could be quite powerful as well. But then we're starting to get into like clicking way too many buttons, like 3 buttons. But anyway, so then we have Savalin, which is obviously our big, you know, defense element. I've been putting this in a lot of builds because, quite frankly, this shield is the best shield in the game. I don't think there's any other shield that even, like, well, sorry, correction. Aegis Aurora is the best shield in the game. This is the close second best shield in the game. Forbidden Shaco we need for the build, and the reason why is Corrupting Cry, and you need it with the high level roll, or at least an over level 30 roll of Corrupting Cry. It's the only thing that makes this build work, and you could try doing this on a 6-link setup. It just does not work as well. Gem level is basically the best way to scale up damage with this particular build. So, you know, do with that what you will, but yeah, you're pretty much going to need this helm to make this build viable to actually be able to do any significant damage, unless you're able to somehow make the explosions better, which could be a thing. But anyway, we use a 4th Vow setup, so similar to like my Bone Shatter build that I put a video up about the other day. We use 4th Vow to basically convert element, well, we use it to make armor apply to chaos damage taken, and then we convert our damage, our elemental damage to chaos damage through the use of divine flesh on the tree, which in this case we actually put up in this node up here. And I should add, I don't think we have, oh, we do have tattoos in there. We'll talk about that after, because tattoos are actually really significant. And then basically we're running just any old gloves, damage over time, preferable. These aren't the best gloves you can get, but resistances, damage over time, life, all the good stuff. This was before the 3.25 league where they changed all the multiplicative changes. So this build is actually significantly more tanky than what it was in this league. Corpse Walkers, we generate level 20 Corpse Walk, so we generate corpses as we run around, which is really useful. If we're blowing corpses up with our war cries, this is actually going to give us really, really good clear, theoretically. Defiance of Destiny, still like one of the best amulets for defense. Arguably, do you need this though if you have the tree? No, you could actually put, you know, an All's Uprising or something like that on the build and make it even better. But this is just something to give you an idea of how to make this build work. But, you know, I pretty much expect smarter people than myself to take this idea and then totally, you know, re-engineer it to something that's even cooler, but it's just to give you a skeleton to work on. Now, I just had amethyst rings on my setup originally, and rings that gave me ore resist and chaos resist and stuff like that. Flow of the Untethered, We do use cooldown reduction, and the reason why is I wanted to, like, when I was playing it as an auto bomber, the idea is to run as much CDR as you can so that it just keeps cycling and you don't have to run back and stuff like that. This isn't a big issue. Cooldown reduction still applies to war cries, so you should still have CDR, so your war cries is almost instant, but we don't know what that 120% is going to feel like when you're running around and popping it yourself. So until I see this build actually work for itself, I'm going to go with continue to use Flow of the Untethered, knowing that there's other belts that you could use. You could also use crafts as well on your belt to get cooldown reduction as well if you're doing Syndicate, so that's also a consideration. But Slipstream does give you a fair bit of mobility, so that's also pretty cool. Now, I just had an Amethyst Flask on the build. Witchfire Brew is really useful. It actually gives us a big chunk of damage. Basically, it applies vulnerability, level 21 vulnerability curse aura during effect, so really useful for just straight up damage. Granite Flask, Bismuth Flask as well, and Quartz Flask because I delve, so I always use Quartz Flask because I don't like to get stuck on stuff. But that's it for the gear. We'll go through all the gems and stuff like that next. Okay, so in our shield we run shield charge. I don't know why we had empower in this actually. I think we just, oh no, because we were leveling it up just for the lols. So you could actually put like fortify in this setup, to be honest with you. If you're running this, and then you could have a fortify configuration. So I don't think we had fortified tick. Yeah, so you could run fortified. And so when you're running around dropping your corrupting cry, your shield charge, drop your corrupting cry, so on and so on. And then we run in the helm with corrupting, level 34 corrupting cry built into the helmet. It's a technical 5 link, so we have enduring cry, deadly ailments, awaken brutality, and swift affliction. Then we run Val Reap, cruelty, swift affliction, empower to get the gem level up, awaken brutality, and awaken control destruction. This just increases our damage and drops. Predominantly, this is for bosses, right? But corrupting cry should be strong enough in this iteration to do some pretty significant damage to pretty much anything. Then we run an automation setup with Life Tap, Molten Shell, and Phase Run. You might be like, oh, why would you run Phase Run when you're running Quartz Flask? I just really like phasing. It's efficient. It's really good for Delve. You have a lot of uptime with it. In this build, you don't want to get stuck. You just want to run through enemies and keep, corpse crying and stuff like that. So yeah, this is pretty good for like, 500 depth Delve, something like that. It can take down Crystal Kings and things, though it needs a bit more of a health pool buff. But yeah, it something to keep in the back of your mind. But you could change this out and put anything on it. It's up to you. Then I also ran a custom damage taken Hydrosphere setup with Life Tap. So with Culling Strike. So basically you get hit, Hydrosphere would drop, and then basically, yeah, you would kill everything. As far as I'm aware. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. Maybe not. Anyway. Yeah, you could do this. You could also do it with Void Sphere as well as another one that would also apply the same sort of effect, and it'll pull all the enemies into one pool and bring them in together, which is actually pretty efficient if you think about it, because yeah, then your explode will then shotgun and blow stuff up even better. In our aura setup, in our weapon 1, we run Pride, Determination, and Malevolence. And obviously we've got Summon Harbinger in Time, and On-Kill Monster Explosion from our... it's going to be crazy, actually. From our Marauder Ascendancy, Ancestral Commander, and then obviously Corpse Walks in the build as well. But that's it for gem setups. Like, you can mix and match and do whatever you want with it, but this just gets it working, so it's at least a workable build that actually does stuff. Okay, so now for the for the actual skill tree. So there's a lot of like management of resources here, but Warcry buff and node, well, Warcry buff nodes are pretty much the target here. You'll notice there's a lot of tattoos. This is one of those scenarios where you actually get to use that tattoo of the Tukahama Warcaller, which is 8% increased Warcry cooldown and recovery rate. Now, if you notice in the Ascendancy, we actually get shafted on that. We get... Oh, it's Warcry speed that we get shafted on, but basically the recovery rate is what we need. Now, arguably, you could do like flat armor or physical damage if you get to a point where you don't need to run this many. But because I was running an auto bomber, I just didn't want to chance it, so I just totally throttled the hell out of these tattoos and just had the whole tree as cooldown recovery rate because, why not? But in this case, looking at it, you could put armor and physical damage because you're not going to need so much recovery rate. But basically, my Warcry is going to be recovering pretty quickly, and in fact we could probably find out what our recovery rate is. Where is it? Uptime, Warcry, skill cooldown, 1.45 seconds, it's saying. that's pretty fast. Yeah, okay. No, it's not fast enough. Could be faster. So anyway, so skill tree wise, basically we come down on the health nodes at the very start of the Marauder tree into Warrior's Blood up to Born to Fight. Then we want all these Deep Breaths nodes, and then remove all damaging ailments when you war cry. So you really, like, this is how you get around ailment immunity in this type of build setup. And then we have an Adorn jewel. So we do stack a couple of jewels that do like increased damage over time and mana reservation efficiency, just so that we're not burning up all of our mana and whatnot. But a lot of our skills are all like life tap skills and stuff like that too. So that sort of takes away some of the sting. In fact, like, yeah, Corrupting Cry costs like 372 life, so we just need a pretty consistent amount of life regeneration at the end of the day. Then we come up and basically we're taking Intelligence node here, Vanquisher, as well as the 40% increased physical damage with skills that cost life. We'll talk about clusters last. We come up, and this is where we're going to put our Divine Flesh setup, so we need a Glorious Vanity configuration. We grab the Purity of Flesh and the Sovereignty node as well. And then basically we come down, we get Stamina, get another Jewel Socket, we get Cannibalistic Rite. We also want As the Mountain and increased Spell Block as well. It's going to give us a huge amount of defense. And then we want this whole radial node for Warcry, so up to Natural Authority. And you want to go for the increased duration, but now thinking about it, buff effect, no, you don't need the buff effect, it's useless. Though it would work, but will give you 50 life regeneration per second, but you get way more damage out of the duration. Yeah. Anyway, so we'll go down to, onto Bloodless. We've got another cluster jewel setup we'll talk about after. Then we go to Champion of the Cause. And then basically we go all the way across to Versatile Combatant. We want the Tetsudo node. We want Shield Mastery with increased block again. Cloth and Chain, Golem's Blood, up into the other Endurance Charge node, and we have a Watcher's Eye in here, which just gives us 50% increased flat physical damage with Pride. You could also put a better Watcher's Eye in here. This is not a good Watcher's Eye. It's only semi-good because of the damage roll. But yeah, you could definitely improve this drastically. Then we come back up for Unwavering Stance, and we just put another Jewel Socket in here. So that's basically it. It's not the hardest tree in the world to follow. Now, Cluster Jewels. We run Master the Fundamentals, Battle Hardened, Furious Assault. That's our Ancestral Commander that will get more damage with not having in. Then we run Warning Call and Lead by Example, and that just gives us our Onslaught and also gives us increased armor as well. And for our other cluster jewel, we have Master the Fundamentals and Battle Hardened. Again, just more jewels which stack with our Adorn setup, and that's it. Now, as far as the Ascendancy goes, we're going to go Ancestral Endurance into whereas Ancestral Defiance. This is going to give us a lot of tankability. And then Call of the Ancestors, and then Death Rattle, which gives us our Corpse Explode. I don't have a sequence yet because this is an untested build with this Ascendancy. So do with it what you will. Now, I'm not accounting for things like Forbidden Flesh and Flame. So if you wanted to amp the damage up pretty significantly, you could also consider like Hinakora's Death Fury would be pretty ridiculous, to be honest with you. But you could also do things like, you know, putting on Valako's Storm and overcapping reses. There's not any other nodes there. We would get benefits of running Warbringer potentially, but it's not showing us right now. Obviously, if we ran Aspect of Carnage, that would be ridiculous, but also ridiculously expensive. Jug, again, like, you've got so many endurance charges, 8 endurance charges, so you get a pretty good benefit from Unyielding. Unflinching would be useful as well. Unrelenting, again, would give you a lot more tanking ability, and also Untiring would be useful, and also Unbreakable would do the job as well, 47% increased effective hit pool. So you could actually do some pretty cool stuff. If you drop the damage, you could get the defense up to 500k pretty easily, and you could be quite tanky. But I'll leave that up to you guys to figure out. Like, this is, again, just a skeleton to give you an idea of what to achieve. If you're going to rip points back down, I'd just honestly just rip these points out. And that's how you save it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points there. And then basically you just chuck that Watcher's Eye into any of the standard jewel sockets, and your damage will go down by an increment of like 185k or something like that. But yeah, you'll still have tons of damage. But yeah, that's basically how to get the build up and running, and the skill tree and whatnot. Okay, so that's another build that you can consider playing. Now, one of the big problems with this event is that it's only a month long, and I suspect they will inevitably extend it, which is why I'm putting these POBs up. Look, part of the fun of this event is actually playing different builds that you haven't played before, or different builds that are just fun and exciting instead of the same old, same old. I know a lot of people will be going off to try and race to the top of the ladder and play the same old shit that they've played every other league. But half of the fun of having all of these ascendancies is the build diversity that can come from it. So I thought I would put up all these different POBs for people who just want different play styles and off-meta stuff, not the same old like Lightning Strike and all the Lightning Strike Wardens and stuff like that sort of setups. Even though you can't do that in this, but sure people will do it on every ascendancy they can. And half the fun is then min-maxing these builds to make some crazy off-meta stuff that is as powerful as any other build. In particular, mine tend to be on the higher level of tank side with a little bit lower damage. It's just how I play. And I'd be pretty confident to say that a number of these builds can make it to Ubers, but to be honest with you, there are other objectives in Path of Exile 1 than just going and fighting Ubers, like Delve Progression or Blight and stuff like that. It's really just the mechanic that takes your fancy at the end of the day. Anyway, if you like these videos, and this video in particular, don't forget to like and sub to the channel. I'm going to have probably another 2 videos coming out tomorrow, but we're going to be doing an amalgamation of all the different builds that people have got. Like, we're going to go through a bunch of videos and then basically put up a bit of a curation, but we might do like 10 or 15 because there's a lot of different builds that people are theory crafting and stuff like that which look really cool, like Sanctum runners and all sorts of interesting stuff. So if you want to see that video, let me know in the comments below, and maybe some suggestions of creators that I could feature and stuff like that would be fantastic for anyone who watches this. But anyway, I'll see you guys later and have a good one.